Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa spoke with the media this week, and it was very clear how excited they are for Jim Harbaugh to be taking over this football team, and there might have been a little bit of shade in there for Brandon Staley as well.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons together, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you all to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen today, and to make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, we got to hear from Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack for the first time since they both decided and agreed on taking pay cuts to stay with the Chargers. And I think what they have to say kind of makes you feel a lot better about who they are and kind of changes the image on how they are seen. And also we got to hear from defensive coordinator Jesse Minter, and he is very excited about restoring Derwin James to prominence, making sure everyone knows he is one of the best safeties in the National Football League. And we also heard from the Chargers offensive coordinator Greg Roman, and he is stoked to have Justin Hebert, and he says the stratosphere is the limit.
Yeah, whatever's above the sky is what he thinks the potential is for Justin Herbert. But it was also interesting saying, hey, the rest of the team still has to come around him, though, if we're going to actually see what that full potential could look like. But let's start with the edge rushers, David. 2 guys who, honestly, we weren't sure were going to be with the team. Truly, we weren't sure. I mean, either one of them could have been gone with the Chargers $60+ million over the salary cap at one point in the offseason, but both decided to stay, which is awesome for the Chargers to still boast that elite pair of pass rushers. But it was very interesting hearing them for the first time since Jim Harbaugh took over, the first time since we knew that they were going to be back with the team. And to me, it felt like there was a little shade in there for Brandon Staley. I mean, I know there was rumors out there about, maybe some beef between Joey Bosa and Brandon Staley, or just how much Joey Bosa liked Brandon Staley. We know that Khalil Mack and Brandon Staley were boys, but when I hear this, it makes me think some things. This is from Joey Bosa, who says, I think it just feels like Coach Harbaugh is leading the team the way it should be led. It has a feeling of being back in college with Coach Urban Meyer. The message is sent from the top, and it doesn't get mixed up as it's moving down the ladder. It's boom. This is how we're doing things, and everybody is following that. I think it's impressive. The details that everybody has been on and the effort, just the competitiveness that has been going on here the last few weeks, it's been great. And maybe I'm a cynic, and I am a cynic, to some degree. But, David, to me, that's him saying, hey, this is how things are now, and the way things are under Jim Harbaugh are better than they were and different than they were under Brandon Staley.
That's what I'm hearing. I mean, that's what I'm hearing for sure. And Joey Bosa, when he gets up at the podium and he speaks, he's very candid. He says what's on his mind. He says what he feels, and I feel like he is truly honest with his feelings. And when he says something like that resonates. Like that, you hear that. You're like, okay, well, maybe there was a disconnect there between the messaging that was coming from the top and then being disseminated down. And he's saying with Jim Harbaugh, that's not the case at all. We know exactly the direction we are going. We know exactly what we're doing. It is crystal clear, and I love it.
Me too. I mean, even Khalil Mack, who wouldn't say a bad thing, I'm sure, about Brandon Staley, but even kind of reading between the lines a little bit, saying, hey, Jim Harbaugh's a straight shooter. There's a difference to the attention to detail that we're putting into practices this year. It's not easy to not hard to kind of see where the differences are between how Brandon Staley was running things and how now Jim Harbaugh is. But I think the message staying the same is the most important thing here. And I think that's one of the big things we kind of harped in the Brandon Staley thing is, first of all, kind of at least at some point when you're losing, it starts coming off disingenuous, right? Oh, yeah. The other time, too, him trying to control so many things that maybe the message as it was getting disseminated, especially when you have people saying kind of he has his group of guys that are Staley guys, and then there's everybody else, that everybody is totally on the same page, and some guys aren't getting special treatment, right, when the rest of the guys are kind of left in the wayside. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting from Khalil Mack specifically was him wanting to play not just competitive football, but meaningful football, and kind of having to be sold on that. a little bit from Jim Harbaugh. And to me, it was, I think, one of the first conversations we had. I let him know, Coach, I'm signed back here to win. I'm not coming to play competitive football. I want to play meaningful football at the end of the year. That was pretty much our conversation. And it's nice to know that, these guys believe that this squad can win this year. Khalil Mack's not playing for 2025, right? And Jim Harbaugh sold him on the vision of, hey, with the guys we have here, we can win. And it's not that crazy to think.
Yeah, not at all. And I think for Khalil Mack here, being in year 11, it's very much the truth. Like, I mean, this guy is a guy that went over 100 sacks in his career last year after a truly phenomenal performance. I mean, 17 sack season at his age. He was truly one of the best defenders in all of football last year. I mean, it was really a sight to see, to watch him play, and the ferociousness that he played, and the availability, and just how impactful he was on a down in and down out basis. Khalil Mack was one of the constants of that Chargers team last year.
Yeah.
And for him to come back and say, hey, Coach, like, I'm not here to make money. I'm here to win a Lombardi trophy. I'm here to win a championship. That's the only thing that's missing from my trophy case, is that ultimate prize in the National Football League. And he believes that the Chargers have all of the correct components, all of the ingredients for that recipe to go out there and get that done.
Yeah, and he also just said about Jim Harbaugh, he's not just going to tell you that because you want to hear it. He kind of just kept it real and told me, hey, well, we have these guys on each side. We can win. And he's like, we have this number now. We can work on building some certain guys up and bringing certain guys in. And I just love that they were able to sell him on that vision. And it's also a big reason why he ended up taking a pay cut. And like, that's crazy to think about, but being that much of a team player. The more surprising one was Joey Bosa, who literally, it was rumored the week it happened that he wasn't going to take a pay cut. I think for his image with Chargers fans because of the injuries, that's not a small thing. And when he was talking about him actually taking a pay cut, surprisingly enough, he said it was a pretty easy decision. He said, yeah, that's what it was. Winning football games is more important to me right now than making some extra money. I think if a guy like Khalil Mack is coming off of a year with 17 sacks and can take that cut, it shows the kind of guy that he is, and it also shows the kind of culture that you have brewing here. That's who I want to be with. And David, taking pay cuts in the National Football League, for Khalil Mack specifically, right, when you're coming off a 17 sack season, is crazy. But Joey Bosa, for a guy who's missed a lot of football, I do think this does a lot in the hearts of Chargers fans, him putting his money literally where his mouth is and saying like, hey, I know I haven't been what I need to be, and I'm so committed to winning that I'll actually give a little bit of money back. Nobody gives money back, David, but here Joey Bosa is doing it for the cause and doing it because he believes in the culture that Jim Harbaugh is building here now.
Yeah, and I think for Joey specifically, a lot of people out there have the image of Joey Bosa being a very selfish person. Like, it's all about me. I don't care about the team. Like, it's all about what I'm going to bring to the table. But that's not the case at all from what he is saying, and the actions speak louder than the words. He said, he gave up the money. He foregoed the money. He said, I'm good. I've made plenty of money. That's not what I'm looking for at this point in time. I want another chance to come back and play with Khalil Mack. I want to come back and play with this team. He also said, I want to retire a Charger, which is crazy. I don't think anybody out there would have expected that to come out of his mouth. But I feel like now you feel like, this is a different guy. He feels really good about where he's at, and he feels really strongly that this Chargers team can compete and go out there and win a championship. And also he said, like, hey, if I go out there and I kill it the next year, then maybe we can, talk about the money situation again, basically in a matter of speaking. But I just love hearing that those words come out of Joey Bosa's mouth, and it makes you feel, really kind of different about the person that Joey Bosa is.
It changes the image, and like the thing is like, what is he supposed to say, right? If you're asked if you want to retire a Charger, that'd be a pretty wild move to be like, you know what, actually I want to retire a 49er with my brother, right? Like, that'd be a pretty wild thing to say. To me, the part that kind of stood out more was him saying, like, basically something to the effect of, I was here for the tough part.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave now when it's getting good.
Yeah, I want the rewards too.
I went through the tough years, and now we're probably on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really telling to me, right? Because he said, hey, every year I come in and it's not like I think we're going to lose a bunch of games every year. But this year, I really mean it. Like, this is a squad and this is a coaching staff I really do think can get us over the hump. And so to hear him kind of talk about it like that, I thought was awesome. But also to hear Jesse Minter talk about what he's going to do with these dudes and how excited he is to have this pass rushing group at his disposal was really awesome. And he also said the key to defense, just clone Derwin James and give me 3 more Derwin James and we'll be in business. So we're going to get into Jesse Minter, the new defensive coordinator's thoughts, and much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to tell you guys about eBay Motors because I'm sure you think about a lot of things with eBay, but you might not think of them having all the parts that you need for your car, and I'm telling you that's the place that you need to be because passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive because eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's what makes it easy for your car to bring home the MVP and huge wins for yourself. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. David, we also got to hear from Jesse Minter, the Chargers' new defensive coordinator, for the first time in a long time. I think probably for the first time since he was hired after that kind of initial press conference. Yeah. And it was interesting to hear kind of how he thought about the offseason and everything. And there was one guy that he talked about that you just couldn't kind of get past how excited he was. And I think for the way that he's played, and we're talking, of course, about Derwin James, that's not surprising, but like he doesn't think of Derwin James as a guy who's been struggling and hasn't been able to, right, like be the guy that he knows he can be. But when he was talking about Derwin James specifically, he said, this is going to be one of the big things is how they use him, right? And he said, this is what it is. Where can he be most effective in a certain game, in a certain type of matchup? He can do it all, but as I've said before, you've got to be careful of not overloading him. And that is the huge part to me, David, because we know Derwin James is really versatile, but as we saw under the Brandon Staley regime, just because somebody's versatile doesn't mean it's kind of going to take away from maybe some of the things that make them great if you're overloading them. So I'm glad that's kind of what's at the front of his mind right now is, hey, I want to get the most out of Derwin James, but at the same time, you have to be careful with how you do it.
I agree. And I think we saw towards the back end of last year when Derwin James was given a more kind of singular focus on what his assignments were, we saw a much better version of Derwin James. So I feel like that's Jesse Minter watching that, acknowledging that, and saying, hey, I know he can do all of these great things. I know he can cover the tight ends. I know he can cover a wide receiver one-on-one. I know that he can play on the back end. I know he can wreak havoc as a blitzer. But I also know that I need to make sure that he knows exactly what his assignment is on any given game. And we're going to streamline that. We're going to simplify that so Derwin James can go out there and play fast and ferocious, because we know he is at his best when he can just get downhill and not think and go out there and play.
And that's one of the things I've heard, not just from Jesse Minter's former players, but also Mike McDonald's former players and guys that play in that system too. Two very similar systems, obviously, is just like where you line up isn't as important in Jesse Minter's defense, because what you're learning is exactly what you're trying to get out of every defensive look. So no matter where you're lining up, what you're trying to do is the same thing. Yeah. What you're trying to do, what you're trying to take away stays the same. So it's not like now because Derwin James is in the slot, he has to think of 16 different things and, okay, how do I make this perfect? What's my leverage? All of those things, right? He knows what the goal of the defense is going to do on that play. Where he's lining up doesn't change that. So I think that's an important part of it. And like you brought up at the beginning of the show, right? Jesse Minter is focused on returning Derwin James to greatness. And let's be honest, if this defense wants to improve, if we really want to see the turnaround and give Justin Herbert maybe the first above average defense of his entire career, it starts with Derwin James playing extremely well on the back end. And like I said, Jesse Minter also said, hey, let's just clone him a couple times. Give me 3 more Derwin James, and we'll be fine. But
give me one in the slot, give me one on the edge, and give me one on the back end. And
we've talked about it before. Like, if you had to have one player that had to play every single position, right, and that you had to have an entire defense of one player,
Derwin James.
It would be Derwin James. Because it's like, hey, you can pick an edge rusher, but you don't want an edge rusher playing corner, right? Like, Derwin James as a defensive tackle is better than Joey Bosa as a cornerback, right? That's just what it is. So he is that guy. But talking about edge rushers, it was also interesting here hearing what Jesse Minter had to say about getting that 4th edge rusher and Bud Dupree and adding strength to strength and what that's going to be able to do for him in this defense. And he said, those guys allow you to rotate those guys on a normal downs to stay fresh. And then the money downs in this league, the money areas of the field, as the field shrinks, you get the chances to get off the field, to have fresh pass rushers, and to have those guys' ability to be at their best in those moments where they can affect a game on more certain downs. Not that they can't affect it on first down, but when they're able to really cut it loose and help us get off the field in critical situations by maybe a rep or 2 less, being more fresh towards the 3rd quarter or 4th quarter, really closing out games to be at your best, it's certainly a blessing to have those 4 guys. And that's the important part, David. Getting off the field in those critical situations, the closers being closers, something we've missed in recent years.
Not only that, but I think the one thing that really resonated the most with me is being fresh in the 3rd and, more importantly, in the 4th quarters when you're trying to close out a ball game. When you have 4 extremely capable pass rushers that you can rotate in throughout the ball game and then maybe save a little bit towards the end and then absolutely let them loose and let them go close out a game and go secure a win for you, that is going to pay dividends without a doubt. So bringing in Bud Dupree just makes this edge room that much longer, that much deeper, and I think that much more effective.
And I think one of the things that we even heard from Joey Bosa is just like them, when they go off the field, knowing that there's just not going to be such a steep drop off defensively, right? Like, you're not going from potentially, no shade, Joey Bosa to Chris Rumpf, where like teams are going to see that and they're going to know it. And also, you're just not going to be able to have Chris Rumpf on the field that long because other teams are going to know that. So like, it lets you feel like you can give Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack more of a rest because you have Thule and Bud Dupree coming off of the edge. And both those guys had really high things to say about Bud Dupree being an elite pass rusher and just how excited they all are to work together and kind of feeding off of each other. And just as a locker room guy, it seems like
great personality.
Man for man, everyone is kind of bringing that up just about how good of a dude he is in the locker room. They call him Butter too, which is a funny nickname. But one of the other things that Jesse Minter talked about really matched up with what we've heard coming out of practice this last week, and that is rookie 5th-round pick Tarheeb Still getting in on the action and making some waves at Chargers mandatory minicamp as we go into the break here, which I love to see, David, because this is what happened. He had an interception off of Justin Herbert, which is awesome. Also had 2 more pass breakups and one that should have been another interception at practice on Wednesday. And then you have Jesse Minter saying this about Tarheeb Still. Tarheeb has probably in the last 3 or 4 practices made a really, really good jump that you sort of expect you got to make after being able to digest 5 or 6 practices. But David, that's a huge development because what it means is competition for Jasir Taylor in the slot and potentially not just handing the job to a guy that had some struggles in 2023.
And you can't do that. You absolutely cannot do that in this situation. You want that competition. You need that competition. And I've been saying it since the Chargers drafted Tarheeb Still, and I watched the tape on him. This guy, I think, is tailor-made for the slot. With the way he tackles, I mean, just very technically sound. With the ball skills, this is the guy that had 5 interceptions at Maryland last year. This guy knows how to get his hands on the football. So that combination in the slot, I think if he's able to really push to Jasir Taylor, maybe even overtake Jasir Taylor, I really, really like that aspect and that prospect of that Chargers secondary with him in the slot. Obviously, nothing's going to be given to him. He's going to have to earn it, but that's where it should be. I mean, this is a competition. We need to see the absolute best defenders on the field because last year it wasn't good enough. And Jasir Taylor was part of that defense that was not good enough. So he needs that competition to push him to get the absolute best out of him. And we'll see who rises to the top.
Yeah, and when you're talking about a Chargers defense that needs to turn around in a major way, you're looking at where can the improvements come from, right? Like, can Christian Fulton be better than what we saw from Michael Davis? And can Denzel Perryman and Junior Colson bring an improvement on what you had last year in an Eric Kendricks and a Kenneth Murray, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that the best version of this defense probably has Tarheeb still starting on it, just because of what we were able to see. And also just because when I watched Tarheeb still, it was very much like a very light version, not nearly the same player as a Mikey Samerstill, right? You can see a lot of the same traits between those guys where it's just like the fearlessness to go and get his hands dirty in the running game when he has to, the ability to kind of see things unfolding in front of him and being able to make breaks on the football and really break up passes and make big plays. You saw all of those things. And he might not be at the level of Mikey Samerstill, but when you're seeing Mikey Samerstill was the perfect person to play in the slot for Jesse Minter, I think Tarheeb still is closer to that than what Jasir Taylor is. But also, hey, if Jasir Taylor can make that next leap, you love that. You just don't want to see it handed to him. And I think he will go into training camp, Jasir Taylor will, as the starter, and it'll be up to Tarheeb still to kind of take it away from him. But we still have more great stuff to get into because we did get to hear from Greg Roman, who said that the stratosphere is the limit for Justin Herbert, and also talked about, not being too caught up in, people being afraid that Justin Herbert's not going to throw the football, but there'll still be some medieval parts of this offense. So we'll get into all that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. David, we got to hear from both of the coordinators on Wednesday, and we wanted to make sure we got to their thoughts and make sure you guys are back here. We should be back on Monday. It is my first Father's Day, so, it could potentially get pushed to Tuesday, but I do think we'll be back on Monday, getting into more that came out of this last mandatory minicamp before we go into the dark ages of no Chargers actual practice to talk about. So there is still some more great stuff from minicamp that we want to get into and some guys that were standing out. But I do want to talk about their offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, getting up at the podium. And I know he's a dude that's been fired a bunch of times and been hated by a lot of teams, but man, it's hard not to like the dude when he gets up and talks. I mean, he seems like a pretty genuine, down-to-earth dude that believes in what the Chargers are building here offensively, and most importantly, knows how good of a quarterback that he has and is not blind to that. But I do want to make sure everyone is checking out the Locked On Sports Today first ever national 24/7 sports streaming channel, which you can find and subscribe to on YouTube, as well as finding on the Amazon Fire free TV channels apps. So make sure you guys check that out because it is coverage 24/7 around the clock of every sport from around the country, but getting the expertise from those teams and those sports from people who are covering their teams every single day, and the Locked On expertise that you can only get with this network. So make sure you guys go subscribe to Locked On Sports Today right now. It's a great thing to have going on there. But Dave, let's talk about Greg Roman and specifically talking about Justin Herbert and why he thinks that the sky might not even be the limit for Justin Herbert. He said his talent speaks for itself. We all know that about Justin. The sky is the limit. What's above the sky, the stratosphere is the limit. It's upon all of us, coaches, players, the line receivers, and tight ends in the backs, all of us to put it all together into a winning way. And I love to hear that, David, not just about, we know what the potential of Justin Herbert is, but also the fact that the rest of the offense is going to have to come around him for us to really actually see what that looks like in its final form.
Obviously, Justin Herbert needs to be on his game. He's got to perform at an exceptionally high level, but Justin Herbert can't be at his best. If the offensive line is not blocking the way they need to block and giving him time, if the receivers aren't running the crisp routes and getting open, catching the football, if the tight ends aren't blocking, if they're not catching the football, if the running backs aren't hitting those holes and able to get those extra yards, all of those elements need to be working in concert together to be able to provide the platform that will allow Justin Herbert to go out there and be at his best and play at his best.
Yeah, I love all of that. And it also just is so funny, because it's we've seen 3 separate head coaches and now 4 different offensive coordinators who have all just raved about this dude's intellectual ability. And if Greg Roman says, hey, we tried to overload him. We're trying to overload him, just throw him into the fire, and we couldn't do it. He just knows too much. He gets it too quickly, and he's I don't know if he has a photographic memory, but if he did, it would look a lot like the stuff he's spewing out there after, being able to digest and being able to execute the new offense so quickly already. And I just think that's so awesome for where this Chargers offense wants to go. And I think at least puts to bed some of the concerns about this offense getting off to a sluggish start, because if Justin Herbert's there and he gets everything, you know that you're going to be okay, right? And I think also just the thing you hear when you hear Greg Roman talk about Justin Herbert is like, he's not just going to run the ball 50 times a game because he knows how good Justin Herbert is. And basically when he was asked about the kind of the concerns about the offense being too run-oriented, or if you kind of switch that up when you have a great quarterback like Justin Herbert, he said, I definitely think we want to have some balance in our offense, but we're not just going to run the ball into a brick wall either. Bang our head against a brick wall. Sometimes the illusion of wanting to run the ball is just as powerful as the ability to. So we'll see how it all comes together. That quote was from Daniel Popper. You can get some of these quotes from Greg Roman, Justin Minter, all of these guys. Does a great job at The Athletic. But David, I thought that was interesting because I know a lot of people were afraid of what Greg Roman's offense was. I mean, us as well, you know. I think we wanted a more pass-oriented kind of philosophy as far as who was going to be the next offensive mind around Justin Herbert, and we've seen those guys before.
Yeah.
But what you're hearing here is, hey, it's just the ability to run the football, and us being that tough team doesn't necessarily mean we're going to run the football 40 times a game.
But it's making the defense respect that you can run the football when you want to, and you can run the ball at will, which will make your play action that much more effective, which will make when you go throw the football that much more electric, because the defenses cannot just sit back there and wait for Justin Herbert to throw the ball. Nah. Now you got Greg Roman in town. You know he is going to author a top 10 rushing attack because that's what he does, and that is going to force those defenses to have to think about it.
Yeah.
Are they going to run the ball? Are they going to pass the ball? I don't know. But that illusion is going to make it so much more difficult to try to defend this Chargers offense.
And it just changes what defenses will have to throw at the Chargers, right? Like you can't just like you might have to load the box, and teams aren't loading the box much against Justin Herbert unless it's super obvious run situations. Like why are you going to have that many people close to the line of scrimmage if you have Justin Herbert there that can easily take the top off, right? I think it's a personnel thing, and it's now a philosophical thing with this new Chargers offense. And when talking about it, one of the funniest things was him talking about wanting to get medieval. And I think it was Daniel Popper that kind of, followed up on that. It's like, what does that mean? And I think it goes to kind of the point that he's trying to make here, where it's just like, we want to be the team that nobody wants to play on Sunday, right? We want to be the team that can run the ball and jam the ball down your throat. But it doesn't mean we have to do that all the time, but you're still not going to want to play us because we can do it. And when you're talking about getting medieval, he said this. It means get lower than somebody else and get after them. Get physical. One guy being that way is one thing, but if you get a whole group of guys playing that way, it gets medieval in there. And David, I think as someone, and two guys that have covered the Chargers for a long time, it's like they've been missing a little bit of medieval in that offensive unit.
They sure have. I can't wait for it to get there and get nasty and absolutely get in there and physically move another grown man against his will. I know that, talking to Bradley Bozeman, that's his mentality. And I feel like, with Rashawn Slater and the rest of these guys, Zion Johnson, I feel like they want to have that mentality too. So I think from a philosophical perspective, I absolutely love it. Go out there and just go mean mug and go beat the heck out of the defense for 4 straight quarters. Make them feel that they just played the Chargers.
And everything they're doing in the offseason leads you to think they'll be able to do it. But he also spoke about Quentin Johnston a little bit. And I thought it was interesting, right? Because he seems as excited about him as anyone else talking about this offense. And he said, excellent speed, great guy, can pretty much run on any route that there is. I don't know about that. Really doing a great job. This is the part that I like, though. We're really excited about him, and we have done some different things with him, too, not just lining him up outside, and he's looked great doing it. That, to me, is shade for sure. We're not talking about throwing shade at former coaching staffs. That is shade, because the Chargers last year decided to run him outside, use him as kind of an X receiver, an outside receiver to win one-on-one matchups, and that's not the way that you have to use him, David, and it goes to what we've been saying all along, where it has to be a combination. It has to be personal improvement from Quentin Johnston and also more efficient usage.
It absolutely, and he elaborated on that even further when he said, we want to get the ball on him quick and on quick underneath routes, catch and runs, but we also want to throw some bombs to him as well. So to me, that says there's an understanding there of how to better use Quentin Johnston, maybe get him in motion, get him on those drags, get him on those slants, and then also utilize that 6'3" frame and go throw him the ball, because we know he's got long strides. We know that he's got some good speed and he can run down the football field. I like that more, mixed up version of getting him the football. I think it's going to be a lot more effective, but it's just nice knowing that the play caller knows a better way to use Quentin Johnston.
And I think it just makes it easier to buy in on him being better in year 2 and being hopeful that he can be better in year 2. And how much better, we'll see, right? But I do think that, hey, if you use him the way he should be used, the way he was used more in college, it's going to open up things more in the deep part of the field when people are actually afraid of getting beat. And like I've said before, and I've said from the first moment I saw him, the dude moves different. Like he is fully athletically capable enough of making it at this level. It's just the mental side of things and him actually just kind of refining the parts of his craft that need refining, because he has all the physical ability in the world. But if you got to catch footballs and you got to be able to know the kind of finer nuances of the game to fully show all of your maximum ability. But that's going to do it for today's show. We should be back with you guys on Monday. It is my first Father's Day. We'll see. Still planning on having a show out on Monday, getting into everything else coming out of minicamp as the Chargers go into their 6-week break. But also, if you're missing the show, that's great, because we still have our friends over at Chargers Unleashed, where you can get an hour and a half of me and David, for better or for worse, kind of going off and ranting. Yeah, I mean, I was definitely a little bit unhinged over there. You know, a little bit more time, a little bit more wiggle room there for me to get a little bit more unhinged. So make sure you guys check those guys out. They do great work, and it was a really, really fun episode. But to make sure you're getting the best Chargers podcast, the only podcast that's going to be coming to you the most out of anyone over these next 6 weeks, go subscribe or follow to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. You can also find us every day on all of our social media at Locked On LAC on Twitter, where you can hit us up for the next fan mail and buy or sell show, and also on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. You can also find the show every day on my Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David Drogemeyer's at Dro Talk SD. But we will be getting into more fan stuff next week, but we do want to get as much out of these practices as we can as the Chargers head into the offseason, the last practices, and last time we're hearing from these guys, including Justin Hebert, who seems like he's having more fun these days. Definitely want to get into what he had to say for sure. Jim Harbaugh talked as well. So did Derwin James. Got to get to that on the next show. But we will be getting into more fan stuff, because we do know that everydayers are important to us, and we love you guys. So make sure you guys are back here with us. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.